Cubist by Rafael Guerrero. In this video, I will talk about this artistic movement addressing different topics such as origins, historical context, characteristics, main exponents, social contributions, and principal periods. And at the end, I will analyze one of the most iconic works of this type of art. Avant-garde artistic movement of the early 20th century that was characterized by the dominant use of geometric shapes. His term was coined by the French critic Louis Busselles, claiming that Braque's paintings were made with cubes. At the beginning of the 20th century, Europe was going through a convulsive time that went from the so-called Second Industrial Revolution, which involved an enormous technological, economic, and social change until the arrival of the First World War in 1940. In these years, the theory of instant relativity, prose, psychoanalytic studies, cinema, and photography are developed. Cubist was born in this context, which would be enforced for almost 7 years, beginning on the 20th century and ending in the years of 1914. Cubism was invented in Paris, France around 1907 by Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque, influenced by the impressionist work of Paul Cézanne and the incorporation of primitive art by some artists after the arrival of African sculpture and pieces from the process of European looking of and colonization. It was born in the field of painting and was one of the first manifestations of the abstract style of modern art. It is also considered the most influential artistic style of the early 20th century and one of the most important movements of all the isms because it was the one that triggered the avant-garde process. Cubism is characterized by breaking with traditional perspective and giving a new approach to the way of conceiving painting. The intellectual idea is as important or more than the painting itself, which is why critical work is needed to explain the work. Cubist paintings ignore the traditions of perspective drawing and show many views of a subject at once. Here, the artist tries to show all sides of an object, reduces recognizable images to geometric shapes, and shows objects from various positions at the same time. The tones that appear are muted, although they are later evolved and the color range widens. The element that can be considered key with this artistic trend are geometric shapes. Cubism influenced many of the new styles of modern art. It was considered a revolution within art since it retaliated. First, freeing art from the object, then incorporating elements that were not only paint and canvas, and finally abandoning the artist techniques that had previously been established. It made a great variety of change, among them the search of something new, something that began to discover new forms of expressions and that pretend to have a social interference in art, within the intention that a work was not destined only for contemplation, but for exposed social change. It also reflected through its specific characteristics the reality of that time, a reality in which society was conceived in a more square way, where it was intended to limit the forms and common standards to people. Hence, the technique will be represented in geometric and conceptual configurations, and it was a way of defining works and ideas. Among the main and most prominent exponents of the movement, we have Pablo Picasso, George Braque, Fernand Léger, Juan Gris, and finally Maria Blanchard. Its general characteristics are analytical view of the elements represented. Objects are not represented as they are or as they seem, but as they have been conceived by the mind of the artist, which deconstruct them into their essential geometric forms, directing attention to plastic language, observation, and analysis. Rupture of the principle of imitation of nature in art. Synthesis and geometrization. Use of geometric figures to break down and synthesize the object to represent. Suppression of perspective and claroscuro. use the little or no perspective and almost no spatial depth in the paintings. Plane overlapping, different shots of juxtaposed into one. Incorporation of not-painterly techniques. In addition to using oil paint and other common techniques, the Cubists were the first to incorporate not-painting techniques by introducing collage, predominance of form over substance. In Cubism, the visual analysis and the plastic elements themselves had the leading role. Reference for still life and the human figure. Then we have the styles or periods of Cubism. For Cubism, three essential stages can be considered. First, the primitive Cubism or Cézanne period between 1907 and 1909. This period is characterized by the austerity in color. Neutral tones such as grays and browns dominate, and the renunciation of the traditional perspective, focused on a single point in order to integrate multiple perspectives in a single plane. The next is the analytical cubism or hermetic cubism between 1910 and 1912. In this phase, the solid planes break the contours of the object, exploding in a game that enhances and creates a new language of volumes. In its paintings, there are different sources of light. Color takes a back seat in and multiply perspectives of a single object are broken down into small elements. It is characterized by the pronounced use of geometric forms and by the tendency towards a monochromatic use of color. It is also intended to combine the three-dimensionality of reality with the two-dimensionality of the canvas. From the plastic point of view, angles and straight lines abound. The lighting is not real and does not have a single source, but the painter makes it emerge from different points. The themes of representation are usually still lifes with musical instruments, bottles, pipes, glasses, newspapers, and the human figure. The last phase of Cubism, the synthetic period between 1913 and 1914, it was characterized by the complete rupture of all imitative procedures, also by a greater use of a color and the imitation or introduction of a wide range of textures and materials in painting. It is plastic science in returning to color its prominence. The surfaces became larger and more decorative, despite their fragmentation, and collage was incorporated, which allowed for the exploration of textures with cigarette packs, newspaper pages, pieces of glass, etc. Finally, I will present an artistic analysis of the work of Pablo Picasso desde the Musée d'Avignon, painted in 1907 in France and currently preserved in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. This is a work through which the creation of Cubism as an art style is considered, despite being highly criticized and misunderstood even among the most advanced artists, collectors, and art critics of the time. The first exhibition of the work took place in 1916 at the Salon Anton, Paris. It had no title, although it seems that Picasso called it El Bordel Filosófico. The name Les Demoiselles d'Avignon was given to it by the painter and critic André Salomon, as it reminded him of a bordel on Avignon Street in Barcelona, in which the woman appeared totally naked. For the piece description, we have an oil painting on canvas with dimensions of 243.9 for 233.7 centimeters, where 5 nude and semi-nude women are represented. 4 women of them are standing, while one is sitting. The 3 women in the center have their bodies pointing forward, and the 2 on the edges are in profile with their look towards the middle. The woman who is seated is the most explicit, as she completely opens her legs as if giving a view of her private parts. However, the author has represented the area as a single flat surface. Some of them are partially covered with some solid clothes and others translucent clothes. The faces of the two women on the right side are disfigured, as if changed or mixed with African art masks. The background seems to have no logical or organized structure. It is brown on the left side, gray in the center, and blue and gray on the right side. In the lower center of the painting, in front of all the women, you can see a fruit bowl with some grapes, an apple, a pear, and a melon. Subsequently, in the interpretation of the elements, two perspectives can be appreciated, one from the moral position and another where the skill of the technique is highlighted more than that of the content of the work itself. The fruit bowl in the center is perceived as an offering directed towards the work. In the opposite directions, the looks of the woman are directed towards the spectator. On the other hand, we have the adoption of African art style represented in the mask and some physiological structures of the body, which sought not to be understood or examined under the criteria of the art of that time. And lastly, in these elements, the use of clothing by only some of the ladies is also identified, which leads to reflection because it seeks to cover the private parts of some of them and not the others. On what it is insinuated, a perception of woman as a being that tends to the two sides of the morality, virtue and vice. Finally, the interpretation of the meaning of this work is very difficult to define because, as I mentioned before, it can be perceived from two perspectives, moral and artistic. If we analyze it from the first view, it is a very critical painting since it exposes social facts marked by the injustice, abuse, and censorship, acts that evoke feelings such as intrigue, indignation, and annoyance. On the other hand, if we analyze it from the artistic side, a majestic, ingenious, sophisticated, intelligent, and profound painting can be perceived, generating feelings such as wonder, intrigue, and exaltation. As a general conclusion, I would like to say that Cubism was truly an artistic current that transformed the art of that time because being the first type of conceptual art, it gave way to avant-garde movements to express through it their new ideas, thoughts, and beliefs. And that art was no longer conceived as a single representation of the world in which we live. Another of the important contributions that Cubism brought was the fact of breaking with the paradigms of the artistic techniques that were held, because by implementing the superposition of several perspectives of view on the same plane of the work, it generated the opportunity for the viewer to analyze or think about what he was looking at, in addition to opening the possibility of incorporating new materials in paintings, thus also generating the creation of collage. And to conclude, the autonomy and freedom to creativity and originality that this movement represented for the other artists was what made it greatest achievement, since it allowed the breaking the chains of imitation and naturalistic art to be able to express concepts or ideas in a deeper way. And this is all for me. Thank you very much for your attention.